All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It is March 8th, 2022. Just came in from working outside, doing some work with compost and I'm all grubby right now. But we're in the second week, approaching this end of the second week of um, the war in Ukraine. And, you know, global conflicts are not really my bag. I know that they're bad and people suffer and there's a lot of them going on at any given time. I mean, I shouldn't say global conflict. Conflicts around the globe. Okay. That's just normal human behavior as far as I'm concerned. It really is. It's hard for me to get worked up about it. I was, raised during the Cold War, nuclear weapons, strategic conflicts, proxy wars, the whole thing. I don't think I ever knew a year when there wasn't the beginnings or the escalation of some conflict someplace in the world. It's hard for me to care. I mean, as a practical matter, as a day-to-day matter. And this one is different. Now we've had, okay, step back. I'm kind of doing a series right now on the age of chaos. And the last two videos, I talked about two kinds of demolition, because we are going to be demolished as far as I'm concerned. I don't think there's any way to avoid being demolished. I'll describe why in a moment, because it's actually appropriate to the topic today. But given that we are going to be demolished, there are actually two pathways you could take. The default pathway, the one that we are likely to go down, the one that we are going down right now, the one that we will continue to go down, gathering speed as we go, is an uncontrolled demolition. At the end of an uncontrolled demolition, you are demolished. And because you took no evasive actions, you didn't have a conversation about it, you didn't do triage, you didn't do anything. You just are demolished, and whatever you have at the end is whatever the universe randomly gives you. If there's any little fragments of your culture, any little fragments of the human experience, over the last 200,000 years, it's just random. You get one picture out of the photo album that was destroyed. That level of things. That's the uncontrolled demolition. That's the path we're currently on, and we will stay on that path as far as I can tell until we go over the Seneca Cliff, and we're done. Whatever done means. There's lots of scenarios of what that could mean. The other path we could take, the other kind of demolition, is a controlled demolition, where we have an adult conversation about our predicament, in which conversation we do some triage and we decide as adults, given a terrible situation, how much of our culture can we keep? How do we keep as much culture as possible? How do we keep as much diversity, actual DNA, but also language diversity, cultural diversity, recorded histories of all the different peoples of all the parts of the world and all periods that came before us. How do we keep any of that? And if you don't set out to keep that stuff, well, then maybe you'll have some, and maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just have a few things. The one picture out of a full photo album approach. And of course, the downside is a controlled demolition. Uncontrolled demolition, not everybody will be demolished equally. There's always going to be injustice, economic, cultural, and racial injustice during an uncontrolled demolition. The wealthy will be better off. The global north will be better off. The white people will be better off. Western culture will be more likely preserved, and so on. You'll get a lot of those types of pictures out of the photo album of humanity in an uncontrolled demolition. If you do a controlled demolition, you might get, bits and pieces of the entire experience as it is today. So the controlled demolition is virtually impossible right now. And with every passing day, it becomes less and less likely. In fact, there's a point not too far in the future, maybe a few years, and it might even be a few years in our past, we may have already roared past it. Okay, it may be in our rearview mirror. the point at which we can no longer have the adult conversation about a controlled demolition might already be behind us. But if it's not behind us, it's not too many years in the future. Okay? But we're not having it. What we're having instead is this existential crisis over the war in Ukraine. Because that's what it is. And before that, it was the existential crisis about the rise of Trumpism. And before that, it was the existential crisis about something else. None of these things are real. Okay, these are all cooked up by people wanting something. People come up with these activities because they want something, not because they're trying to have the adult conversation about a controlled demolition. They just want something, and so they blow people up and damage villages and damage cities and invade countries and storm capitals and whatever because they want something. I know everybody wants something. Everybody has their selfish, narcissistic set of needs, and yeah, that's what we're going to pursue. And we're all going to individually pursue our wants and our perceived grievances, until the end of the world. That's how we're going to do it, and we're doing that right now. And the current set of grievances is playing itself out in the war in Ukraine. I'm not actually going to talk about the war in Ukraine. What I want to talk about is its relationship to our predicament involving fossil fuels. And I'm not the only one doing this. I knew there was a connection, and I thought about it and says, oh yeah, that's pretty obvious. And then after a few days, maybe part of a week, I started noticing other commentators really kind of apologetically noticing that this whole kerfuffle is caused by Germany's dependency on natural gas from Russia. I heard just a couple of, like for one day, literally one day, maybe two, it was allowed to be even aired, even as a topic, and that was very quickly off limits, I guess, because there's no discussion of it now. And people will say, well, now is not the time to talk about, things like fossil fuel dependency and global heating and climate change and things like that, because we're having children with cancer dying in Ukraine. And I don't want to de-emphasize that, but I want to point out that the war in Ukraine, which we're all very upset about, and justifiably so, and Russia is talking about nuking Europe and how we're going to avoid being nuked by Russia this time around, like we did the last 4 or 5 times this topic came up. And so we can't talk about dependencies on fossil fuels and whatnot and how those caused the war, but we didn't talk about them before either, and we're not going to talk about them after, because the crisis in Ukraine will continue for a generation. So when do we talk about it? Okay, so I'm talking about it. And you can label me as insensitive or whatever, or blinded or blinkered or whatever. I'll take the labels. It's fine. I'm going to talk about this anyway. I'm not the only one who was worried about this, as I'll clarify in a moment. So Germany is not an oil producing or natural gas producing country, or at least not significant enough to fulfill their needs. And like the rest of Europe, Germany was getting their natural gas and their oil from Russia via pipelines through places like Ukraine. There's also a set of pipelines that were planned to go through Syria, but that got kiboshed. And so they're still taking their oil and natural gas through pipelines through Ukraine. Natural gas, which is methane, is really difficult, expensive to deliver in any manner other than pipelines, and crude oil and gasoline and other derivatives, if there are any, are also more easily delivered via pipelines. So you find these pipeline networks sometimes crossing significant distances from where the oil is being produced and refined to the places where it's being consumed. So no big surprise. Europe is burning a lot of Russian crude oil and natural gas, big industrial powers there, so on. So everybody was pretty happy to be doing business with Russia because it kind of brought the Russian people into the fold of Europe, into the economic sphere, into the global economy. And the idea, which is actually a strategic initiative that started after the Second World War. The idea is actually strategically to get people, nations, dependent on each other economically and in terms of cross-border trade and even movement of people between nations as a way to quell these populist movements, these nationalist movements, and the rise of demagoguery that leads to war. And Europe has seen a lot of war. They've seen a lot of demagogues, a lot of nationalism, a lot of just misdirected angst about xenophobia and the whole thing. And so instead, strategically, to get nations to have more open borders and more economic dependency, and let's get the Russians involved, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, it made a little bit of sense to do that. So it made sense in that strategic sense of getting Russia's really useful and important and fairly locally produced fossil fuels into Europe and have some sharing and caring going on there, right? Hard to say that's a bad idea. That's a good idea up to a point. So about 10 years ago, in 2014, Russia invaded Crimea, which is a peninsula in the Black Sea attached somewhat narrowly to Ukraine and claimed by Russia as a ancestral part of Russia, or the Russians have always lived there. And how did it end up being associated with Ukraine? And by the way, some eastern parts of Ukraine have ties to Russia that don't make any sense, that it's not part of Russia. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Why can't we have this? And so people started making plans for what might happen if there was a conflict in Ukraine, or even just an unfriendly government in Ukraine that wanted to jack Europe around with the pipelines. And Germany unilaterally worked out a deal with Russia to have their own private pipeline from some place in Russia on the Baltic Sea to northern Germany. And it was going to be an undersea pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 1, which I'm not sure it was called Nord Stream 1 in the beginning, but it's called Nord Stream 1 now because there's already a Nord Stream 2. So they were going to have their own party going on with Russia, and they wouldn't be dependent on whatever's going on in little Ukraine over here. And people were saying, that's not a good idea to have your own pipeline with Russia, because Germany is, for whatever reason, historical or economic or combination of things, Germany is the big dog in Europe. They've got the biggest economy. They've got the best balance of trade. They manufacture the most interesting products that the world really wants. German products are held in very high esteem, their cars, for example. And so as Germany goes, the rest of Europe kind of goes. And while Germany was dependent on Ukraine, stability in Ukraine for supplies of natural gas and crude oil from Russia, that would hold the Russians back a little bit from all these grumblings about their territorial claims in Ukraine. Germany would be in a position to lose heavily if Russia invaded Ukraine and broke the pipelines or shut the pipelines, or the pipelines got bombed, or some separatist group sabotaged the pipelines to get at Kyiv, or some other scenario where and Germany would be opposed to that, and Germany would be really worried about their fuel supplies being cut off. At the same time this was going on, Germany, the rest of Europe, the US, all the other nations, including Russia, were signing agreements, starting with the Paris Agreement, that we were supposed to be reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And at the same time, or slightly before, Japan had their Fukushima disaster, and Europeans and others around the world had kind of a freak out about nuclear power. It's been a big problem in parts of Europe because there's a really strong Green Party in Europe and the UK that routinely does well in parliaments and routinely says we have to get ourselves off of nuclear power. So how you feel about nuclear power, I don't care. It's not relevant to this discussion. But Germany was under some pressure to get off of nuclear power. At the same time, they were under pressure to get off of coal because of its impact on climate change. And at the same time, they were trying to wean themselves away from any conflicts in Ukraine over natural gas. So they built their own pipeline to Russia. And the Trump administration was okay with that. I don't think I've ever heard anything about the Trump administration saying that's a bad move. The Biden administration definitely said that Nord Stream 2, the second pipeline, was a bad idea. Don't do it. Well, they did it anyway. And as soon as that pipeline was completed and was pending only regulatory approval in Germany, so here's the pipeline, it's full of gas. Can we open it up? Can we use it? As soon as basically Germany was out of the picture, they had their private pipeline, they had their private deal with Russia. They don't care about Ukraine. Russia invades Ukraine, like the next week. It might have even been the next day, except that all this was happening at the same time as the Olympics in China, and China was working with Russia to not invade Ukraine until after the Olympics were done. So a day after the Olympics were done, and after Germany completed their pipeline, and after all the ducks were lined up and the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted and everything was go, they invaded Ukraine because the Chinese wouldn't care, the Germans wouldn't care, and presumably the rest of the world would either be powerless or wouldn't care. So they invaded Ukraine. So all of that narrative by way of connecting some dots here, that the war in Ukraine is about Russia controlling the natural gas and the oil pipelines. Now, Ukraine, because they are a host nation for these pipelines, they derive fees. And you can imagine there's the pipeline operations and maintenance disrupts communities. There also has to be emergency crews hired and left on site around these pipelines where they go through communities. So if there's ever a leak or an explosion or whatever, there's people on the ground who can deal with the fire. Hazmat teams, teams that work especially with gas and oil fires, and that all costs money. So Ukraine gets a cut of any products that go across their country through the pipelines. And for all we know, they even do the maintenance. So they have they have some skin in the game here. And last I heard, Ukraine makes about $2 billion a year, basically, just allowing the pipelines to go through Ukraine. They're not producing the product, and they're consuming it, but they don't consume most of it. Most of it goes on through to Europe, and in particular to Germany. So, the concern that something bad could happen in Ukraine and the Germans would care about that evaporated when Nord Stream 2 came online, and so the invasion happened. So this is a kind of war for oil. We've heard a lot about that in the last 10 or 15 years, wars for oil. It's a kind of war for oil, but not for control of the oil fields. It's, as we have seen fought in, parts of the Middle East, or, even a lot of the conflicts in Africa are about the oil fields. Who controls them? Who's making the money? Which tribe gets the money from the oil sales? It's pretty strange. But anyway, this is a war for oil, for the availability of oil, the transmission of oil. Now, I've been doing this series about the age of chaos. I haven't talked too much about the kind of things that will typically be seen in an age of chaos. Well, it's going to be chaotic, so you're going to have a lot of chaos. You closing the door? Thank you. And it's all the things that humans do when situations become chaotic. And you know, all the reasons it might break down, I've talked about them a little bit. You know, global heating, things are going to get hot, and that's going to cause crop failures. It's going to cause droughts. It's going to cause you know, people to have to move, so refugee crises. And then there's going to be climate change, and that's going to cause additional problems. Too much rain, too little rain, too cold, too hot, you know, in places, you know, droughts, things like that. So these, and the Pentagon reminds us of this. The Pentagon came out, I think during the Trump administration, you know, maybe it was Obama, came out with reports that said that climate change will be considered by the U.S. military as a hazard, as a multiplier, as they like to call it. That regions that maybe have a tendency towards conflict will be much more likely to have large-scale conflict. The regions that are maybe generating a certain amount of refugees crossing borders will do a lot more of that. So it's it complicates the strategic picture for the military. You know, and if you imagine that ideally what they're doing is keeping a lid on things, then what they're worried about is that as climate change begins to bite, it's going to be increasingly difficult to keep a lid on things. It's just going to be boiling so much hotter, pardon the pun, that you won't be able to keep the lid on, so to speak. Now, lots of people would disagree that that's their job, is to keep a lid on things. You know, I'm on board with a lot of people who think the U.S. military is working for the energy companies to make the world's oil safe for democracy. Right? There's plenty of evidence for that. So, but they are self-reporting, they are self-claiming, they're claiming for their own selves that keeping a lid on things is going to be more difficult in the future. Fine, that's great, I understand. So here's an example of that. So the war in Ukraine is about access to these fuels, and as soon as Germany had their own private, you know, backdoor access to this stuff, then as far as Russia was concerned, it was green light to invade Ukraine. They've been nibbling at the edges, and Germany is not going to care anymore. Okay, so is there anything stopping us from just taking back Ukraine and bringing it back into the empire? No, so they did it. Now, if Germany hadn't made that pipeline, they still might have invaded Ukraine, but they would have had, Germany would have been a lot more likely to be opposed to it, and would have had a lot to say about it, and would have been all over NATO to do something about it, or all over the EU to fix this problem, because Germany wouldn't want their fossil fuels cut off because they're going through Ukraine, and Ukraine's at war. So the problem would be that Germany's dependency on fossil fuels was keeping them in the game to keep peace in Ukraine. And as soon as they had their alternative narrative about their fuel supply, then the lid came off. Just like the Pentagon says, you know, the lid's going to come off. Now, the tie to climate change is that Germany, because they signed on to the Paris Climate Accords, and because they are a leader in Europe, and because people are going to look to them to show the way forward, they have been trying to cut back on their coal production and consumption. So these pipelines were really critical to their response to climate change and their commitments to the Paris Climate Accords. So they really had to have this to keep making money and not be burning coal, because that was the narrative they wanted to play. We're going to burn clean natural gas, methane, and we're going to leave the dirty coal on the ground. Oh, and by the way, we're having to shut down our nuclear plants because of Fukushima. So we really need a lot of natural gas now. 2 pipelines might not even be enough. And you know, that was going to be their response. That's why they did all this. And as soon as they solved that problem for themselves, the war started in Ukraine. So it isn't so much that this is about, you know, fossil fuels, but a war in Ukraine was kept a little bit off the table because of the importance of these fuels moving through Ukraine into Europe. And as soon as there was an alternative pipeline for Germany, at least, then an invasion of Ukraine was back on the table. And almost immediately it happened, almost literally within days of Nord Stream 2 coming online. And as soon as the Olympics were over and those two things were settled, then the invasion took place. Boom. Done. So right now, there's a lot of talk around Europe about cutting off Russian supplies through Ukraine and of course through Nord Stream 1 and 2. And Germany is not wanting to do that, as predicted. Europe doesn't even want to do it. America doesn't want to do it. Well, we don't get hardly any crude oil from the almost said Soviet Union, from Russia. But we want to support our allies in not having their economies implode. So people are going to keep buying Russian crude oil and natural gas on the open market and keeping their economies chugging along at the same time that they're decrying the invasion of Ukraine. And think of the children, right? Well, Russia can do whatever they want in Ukraine. Well, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to tell them stop? Vladimir Putin has already said, if you give me any lip at all, bitch, I'm just going to cut off your natural gas and your crude oil. And my people, we'll have all the natural gas and crude oil we need for our economy. And we've got $6 billion sitting in foreign reserves. We got plenty of money. It'll take us a long time to burn through $6 billion, over $500 billion. And we're sitting pretty. We're doing great. And if you give us any lip, we're going to cut you off, and you're not going to be doing great. Your economies are going to implode. Your people will be rioting in the streets. They'll be looting your shops. They'll be dragging your politicians out of their homes and hanging them from the nearest oak tree. That's what's going to happen to you if you give us any lip about Ukraine. That's how they're playing this out. Now, if we had an adult conversation at some point in the last 5 or 10 years about how, yes, all nations need to wean themselves off of fossil fuels, leave it in the ground. Not just, carbon capture, not electric cars, not, miracles and unicorns and, but actually just leave it in the ground, then we could have had a narrative by now that is different. Russia wants to jerk us around and invade Ukraine. Actually, we don't really need their product anymore, or not so much. We've got a plan for drawing down, and actually we've been drawing down. We're not as reliant as we were, when we signed the Paris Climate Accords, and we're not as reliant as we were when they invaded Crimea and took Crimea and all the other shitty things they've done. We're in pretty good shape right now. And actually, you better not jack us around, because we're going to cut off what little fossil fuels we're consuming. And then you're not going to have your money. And then you are going to burn through your $600 billion. And then you will have problems, because we don't need you anymore. And we're not going to enable you. We're not going to send you money to buy your military and buy your mercenaries and pay your people off so they just shut up and they don't protest. We're not going to send you that money anymore. Hard currencies, dollars and Deutschmarks and pounds. Okay, we're not going to do that. So, but we didn't have that discussion, because we don't talk about a controlled demolition. We don't do that here in the West. We just don't do that. And I don't think we're going to do that. And because we're not going to have that conversation, because our politicians are so limp-wristed and cowardly that they won't talk to us like adults and tell us our situation and help us find other ways and use the national treasure to create a pathway to resilience and sustainability. And where we don't have to be reliant on a bunch of demagogues in Russia having delusions of imperial grandeur. That's where we are right now. We're feeding money. It's close to $1 billion a day to Russia to invade Ukraine. And after they're done invading Ukraine, what's going to stop them from saying, oh, and while I have my finger over the cutoff switch to cut off natural gas and oil to Europe, I think I'm going to invade Estonia, and I'll have this other finger on the button to shut off the natural gas to Europe and the crude oil, so I can invade Moldova. And then there's same story with Georgia and all the others. I'm just going to keep invading these countries. If you give me a lip, bitch, I'm going to turn off your oil and natural gas. You fuckers are going to freeze. That's what Vladimir Putin, that's the game he's playing. And all the time that people are cowering, sitting in their homes, worried about World War III and nuclear holocausts and all this stuff, and they're sending him $1 billion a day. Please don't incinerate us in a nuclear annihilation. Here, have $1 billion. Okay, well, that's, if you want an uncontrolled demolition, then that's how you get an uncontrolled demolition. You just keep sending billions of dollars to this insane Vladimir Putin, and you're going to end up with him invading countries anytime he wants to, and threatening to not push the nuclear button, but to push the shutoff button for your natural gas and crude oil. He doesn't. He actually has a nuclear weapon that isn't even a nuclear weapon. And you know, the countries of Europe are so dependent on his benevolence. Please don't, you know, pull the rug out from under us, Vladimir. We'll send you $1 billion a day if you don't. You know, he's got Europe so over a barrel that he can just do whatever he wants. I mean, I don't think that he can be stopped. I really don't think he can be stopped. Now, this is all an aspect of the age of chaos. This is what happens when you don't talk about the bad things that can happen during an uncontrolled demolition. You get an uncontrolled demolition. We are now not in the wheelhouse. We do not have control of our fate. Vladimir Putin, whatever his mental state, has control of the fate of Europe. Vladimir Putin has control of the state, the continuance of the global economic system, because he can bring Europe down. If he brings Europe down, if you think you have supply chain problems today, just wait until Europe descends into chaos because they have no fossil fuels, or half of them are gone. Just wait. Just watch what happens. And, you know, he might do it just to make his point, the same way the Arabs did it to the U.S. when they didn't like our policies towards Israel back in the 70s. The Arab oil embargoes, of which there was more than one. And, you know, of course, we don't have those kind of problems today, la-di-da. But now we have Vladimir Putin pulling the same stunt. Oh, you don't like what I'm doing? Oh, I'm going to pull back your natural gas. Here's some natural gas. No, I changed my mind. I'm going to pull it back. Oh, here's some more because I like you. No, I don't like you anymore. Okay, that's how it's going to go. And pretty soon, the nations of Europe will be fighting each other over their policies towards Russia. And then he wins. He sits back and he watches them battle it out. And right now, Germany, because they have their own private pipeline, neener, they're setting themselves up to be the Judas goat. Everyone's going to be looking at them saying, yeah, we see you have your private backdoor pipeline to Russia, and you don't care about the rest of us. You'll do whatever Russia wants, let them invade anybody they want, never raise a stink, and you'll have your private pipelines, and the rest of us, if we raise a stink, you know, they're going to cut off the pipelines going through Ukraine. So that's how this is going to play. And that's what the age of chaos is going to be all about. Everyone playing their little corner of the chessboard, you know, with all their pieces in flight. Everybody trying to take control of the center of the board from their corner, and just fighting it out. Uncontrolled demolition. Now, it's unlikely that Russia will actually succeed in what they're trying to pull off. I think there are some wealthy people in Russia called the Russian oligarchs who are going to do really well. But they're operating on the same equivalent principle as our Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses and Bill Gateses. You know, they get their money and then they're fine. They don't really care. I got my money up. I don't care what happens to the rest of the world. Climate change, global heating. So what? I'll just go someplace where it has no impact. I mean, that's what they're thinking. I'm not sure that's feasible, but that's what they're going to think. I got money. Me and my family, we're fine. In fact, I have this entourage of hundreds of people I can take with me anywhere I want to go. You know, some high mountain, some super yacht out in the ocean, some private island someplace, whatever, south of Florida, whatever has to happen to me, I'll figure it out and I'll be fine because I got all the money in the world. And that's our narrative. That's our actual set of expectations. So do they care about you? No. Do they care about global heating? No. Do they care about climate change and climate refugees and regional wars? No, they don't. They just don't care. Now, we could care. We should care. We are the grass on which the fighting elephants are going to trample. And, you know, we should care a lot about what happens to us. But, you know, we're more concerned about the price of gas. And as soon as there was any talk about cutting off our reliance on fossil fuels to Russia, because why are we sending them $1 billion a day again? Look what they're doing with our $1 billion a day. Why are we doing this? Should we be doing this? As soon as people started asking that particular obvious question, the response was, oh my goodness, look at the price of gas today. Why? It's up to $5.50 a gallon. Well, it could go to $6 a gallon. No, actually, I think it could go to $7 a gallon. That's what the narrative was. It went from, let's not send Vladimir Putin $1 billion a day to wage war on the rest of the world. Let's keep our $1 billion a day, and let's figure out how to get off of fossil fuels. That narrative went right out the window because $7 a gallon. And now that's not an adult conversation. Oh, I'm so afraid of $7 a gallon. That is not acting like an adult. That's saying you would rather today send $1 billion today, because it's every day. I'd rather today send $1 billion to Vladimir Putin so that I can rest easy tonight knowing that I won't be paying $10 a gallon for gas, or even $7, or even $6. And $5.50 is way too much. And Joe Biden is a Fruit Loop. And why am I paying $5.50 a gallon for gas? Blame Joe Biden, okay? Rather than blaming yourself for sending $1 billion a day to Vladimir Putin so he can wage war on the free world. I mean, that's what children think, that they're not responsible. Children think they're not responsible. Adults recognize their responsibility. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they got in over their head. Maybe it's time to back away from this. That's what adults do. But we're behaving like children. And this is why, and because that's all I see, this is why I don't think we can have a controlled demolition. I don't think we can have the adult conversation and save the parts that we can obviously save. And then maybe even work hard to save the parts that are not obviously salvageable, but maybe we'd like to try, rather than sending $1 billion a day to Vladimir Putin. Why don't we take that $1 billion a day and try to use it to save something of human genetic and cultural diversity in the age of chaos? Why don't we do that? So I'm pretty sure you could buy a lot of salvage operations of humanity, the culmination of 200,000 years of human progress. I'm pretty sure you can save a lot of that with $1 billion a day. Just don't send it to him. And, to be frank, that's maybe half the fossil fuel requirements in Europe. It's only a tiny fraction of ours here in the US, but it's 50%, say, round figures. I don't really know what it is. Maybe it's a third, but just say 50%, because that's actually an important number. It's 50% of the fossil fuel consumption in Europe, if it was. They're supposed, all of us signed on to the Paris Climate Accords, and later on, other types of technical discussions revealed that actually we should be reducing our fossil fuel consumption to half by 2030. So if we decided to do that a little sooner than 2030, that would be at least in alignment with our commitments under the Paris Climate Accords. That would be in alignment. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing. So to just today tell Vladimir Putin, actually, we're going to cut exports of most of the fossil fuels we're consuming from your oil fields and gas fields, because that's in alignment with our commitments under the Paris Climate Accords, trying to save humanity from an uncontrolled demolition of civilization. That would be completely in alignment. They said they would do that. Well, they don't want to do that. So they're not going to do that. They'll talk about it when they're in Paris signing climate accords, and when they're in Glasgow at the COP26 talking about the same topic. They'll talk about it, but they won't do it. And Vladimir Putin knows they won't. And also consider the possibility that he knows. He has scientists. He has people working for him that are smart. I'm a scientist. I know. His people know, so he knows. Then eventually, yes, humanity is going to have to leave the fossil fuels in the ground. And the way you do that is, well, you either shut down the production facilities or you just stop consuming them. You stop. However you do that. You stop doing it, leave it in the ground, we're done. One and done. Finished. Okay? Well, if that's the case, if we ever do that in a significant way, then probably he doesn't get his $1 billion a day. and he may not even get $1 a day. He may be completely cut off. They may say, yeah, Russia, they're just a bunch of fuckwads. Let's just give them nothing. We'll buy oil from Saudi Arabia. We'll buy oil from Iran. We'll buy oil from the Permian Basin in the U.S., and we're not going to give diddly squat to Russia. Fuck you. Go back to being seal harvesters. Who gives a shit about you? We could do that. And we could do that any day. We could do that. Well, we could have done it last year. We could have done it 2 or 3 years from now. So, he could be thinking, doing his mental calculus, that, well, if he's going to use his money and his influence against Europe for any kind of territorial gains, or make a name for himself as the next Genghis Khan or Attila the Hun, or however he fancies himself, he better do it now while he's getting $1 billion a day. And the Russian people love that $1 billion a day, and his whole circle of friends love that $1 billion a day, big party, woohoo. But if that ever stops or is diminished in a big way, then his territorial claims on the nations of Central Europe is not going to be as popular. I'm going to wage war against Poland. Vladimir, why? Because I want the country under my banner. Yeah, but that's going to cause problems, and we're not getting $1 billion a day anymore. Vladimir, come on. Or we're getting something, but they're always threatening to cut it off and cut us off. They're not going to buy our product anymore. We don't even sell another product. This is it. Timber and oil and gas. That's it. That's all we got. So no, don't invade it. Don't invade Poland. Don't invade Latvia. Don't invade Georgia, because they're going to cut us off. And so he's thinking now, get while the getting's good. That's how we refer to it. Going to get while the getting is good. Because in a few years, it might not be as good. In a few years, he may not have the same leverage. So invade early and invade often. So I guess that's about all I want to say about Ukraine, that the situation is bad because we allowed it to get bad, because we allowed our fossil fuel reliance and our reliance on this particular country, which turns out to be led by a bunch of insane demagogues. Kind of like the way the U.S. was run by an insane demagogue at one point, but for whatever reason, we didn't take advantage of the fact. Maybe if we'd had a string of insane demagogues after 20 years of dealing with insane demagogues, the fourth or fifth one comes along and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to invade Canada." We were like, "What the fuck ever you want to do? I'm out. I'm not paying any attention anymore." It's been 20 years of insane, 20 years of demagogues, 20 years of demonizing everybody everywhere on the planet. Now you want to invade Canada? Fine, go ahead. That's how it happens. The Russian people are fine. Go ahead, invade Ukraine, whatever. You've been threatening to do this for 15 years. Solid, every single day. Just do it. Do it or shut up. Why he did it? Fine. Who cares? That's kind of their attitude, I suspect. After listening to the guy rage and lie and terrorize people and kill journalists and kill opposition people, poison people with God only knows what, including nuclear isotopes. Let him invade Ukraine. Maybe it'll shut him up, right? That's probably what the Russian people are thinking. Let's let him invade Ukraine. Maybe it'll shut the fuck up. He's driving us nuts. He's old now. He's 73. He's probably half senile. Just let him have his fun. Maybe he'll stop. Maybe he'll stop killing us, throwing us in jail, leave us alone, and he'll, get it out of his system. Okay, well, good luck with that. Just good luck with that. That is not how these things play out. And every time we don't, have the adult conversation about getting off of fossil fuels, then we allow some other insane demagogue who got control of the fossil fuels to do whatever they want to do. Welcome to the age of chaos. Just welcome to, uncontrolled demolition. Enjoy. Just enjoy it, because that's what you got. You didn't want to talk about the painful, hard decisions and the painful, difficult things and the embarrassment of how badly you've screwed the pooch. Fine. You didn't want to have that adult conversation. Fine. I understand. I mean, it's not fine, but I understand. I mean, I don't understand, because that just means that you're weak-minded and you're just running from responsibility. You're just a bunch of children. But I understand, even though I don't. On another level, I do. But what I understand is we're doomed. Straight up doomed. It's going to be Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and all the others doing whatever they want to do and threatening to cut us off from fossil fuels that we're supposed to be cutting ourselves off from in order to save the world from an absolute annihilating disaster. Well, maybe after Putin is done shaking us down, like a mugger, taking our wallet, emptying our pockets, and beating us up and harassing our wife, well, maybe we'll give up on fossil fuels. Maybe we'll say, man, I'm not visiting this neighborhood anymore. I'm not going this way anymore. I gotta find a different lifestyle. I gotta get out of this town. I can't live here anymore. I can't deal with these people. And we get off the fossil fuels. We change our ways. We change our lifestyles. Maybe we'll do that after this. I don't know. Well, I do know. Actually, I do know. We're not going to. Not going to happen. We don't get to have an adult discussion about what we're supposed to be doing. We don't get to have that. So we won't. We won't have it. We're being denied the possibility, and instead we're just going to go down this painful path, paved in broken glass, of going over the Seneca Cliff. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because the fact is that the uncontrolled demolition, meaning no one talks about it, no one makes any decisions, we don't do any triage, we don't do anything difficult or embarrassing, we don't deprive ourselves of any pleasures. That path is not paved with broken glass. It's paved with gold bars and grass and pleasant things, carpet, deep pile carpet, like you used to have in the 70s, the 2-inch pile carpet, that kind of stuff. It's real pleasant. What the broken glass is when you go over the cliff, which has a name. It's called the Seneca Cliff. You go along and you're doing really well, and you got a good head of speed, and it looks like there's something. Is it a dip over there? What is that? I don't know what that is. I can't tell. Oh, that's a cliff. Well, here we go. And the broken glass is all at the bottom. The broken glass is all at the bottom of the Seneca Cliff. Now, maybe that's our future anyway. There's no guarantee that a controlled demolition that takes place because we decide to control our descent. There's no guarantee that a controlled demolition does not end in the Seneca Cliff and a chasm full of broken glass. Sadly, it does not. All you're doing is hedging your bets. You're slamming the brakes on. You're trying to stop. You're probably not going to stop in time. And maybe some of the train goes over the cliff, but maybe not all of it does. Maybe some of it stays behind and is saved. And that's what you're hoping. You're hoping that by having the right discussion and being in the right place and making the hard decisions, that you save something. And not what the universe allows you to save at random, but the things that you want. Well, right now, that's not happening. And right now, no one's talking about, right now, people are talking about avoiding a nuclear war. Don't make Vladimir Putin afraid. Don't threaten him in any way. Don't say you're going to stop him, or that Ukraine is important, or that we're trying to save democracies, and you don't inflame his paranoia. That's what we're talking about, because he'll push that nuclear button. Well, yeah, he has another nuclear button that's not technically nuclear, but it's the fossil fuels. He's going to push that one. He's going to push that one every single day. What do you think of that? I got 2 of them. I can push it with both hands. I need 2 more because I can push it with my feet. Shutting down the pipelines. Anyway, I don't know what more there is to say about that. The war is sad. All the wars are sad. I never like to see any of them. The wars for oil were bad. The wars for cultural hegemony were bad. The wars against communism were bad. I mean, I know communism is bad, but was it really worth it? I mean, seriously, the Soviet Union imploded. It didn't need much help. It had its own internal contradictions. Could we have avoided all that other stuff? I don't know. Maybe not. But here we are stuck with the nuclear weapons that were part of the war on communism. And now the nuclear weapons are still so scary that we can't even deal with Vladimir Putin, who's just a simple, straight up, insane demagogue. He's not a political system. He's not even an organized country. He's just this guy, this 72-year-old guy who's off his meds. So who knows what his problem is? He's nuts. And he has nuclear weapons to back you off, and he's got fossil fuels over here to punish people he doesn't like, and he's going to take over the world as far as he's concerned, starting with Central Europe, and who knows, everybody else for that matter. Wow. How did we get to this point? Well, it's obvious how we got to this point. It was obvious that this point was in our future, and there's worse. In the age of chaos, we'll keep floating things up that look even as bad or even worse than this. Because that's what happens when things turn chaotic. Good luck. So I didn't want to talk about this today. I didn't want to talk about this at all, but I thought it was appropriate. Signs of the times, I guess. Signs of the times. There will be more and worse. There will be terrible fires. There will be terrible heat waves. There will be terrible refugee crises. Of course, we have one right now in Europe, the terrible refugee crisis, and it's going to destabilize Poland, destabilize Germany, destabilize France and all the others. It's already destabilizing the UK, right? They got Brexit because of the last refugee crisis. And now, they've got the same noise going on. What are these people doing coming to the UK? And well, humanitarian crisis. Yeah, but we don't like refugees or something. Well, we'll see what happens, right? Oh yeah, we're all going to see what happens. I mean, good luck, I guess. Be ready for more. Be ready for be ready for not having any control of what happens to you, because that's the default. That's where we're going.